21st or 22nd, I would say. And we had a date, and she said that her parents had invited me to Christmas dinner at their house, which I thought was really neat. I went back to the base, and the next day they froze us. No letters, no telephone calls, no nothing, absolutely nothing. And this was about the 23rd. Well, you know, I couldn't write her a letter, I couldn't call her, I couldn't leave a note with someone to give to her. We were just absolutely incommunicado. And I always felt bad about that, because 13 minutes after midnight on Christmas Eve of 1944, we left for Hawaii. And when we were going to Hawaii, we didn't have the slightest idea. That's all we knew. And we were airborne before the pilot was allowed to open our orders and find out where we were actually going. Now, the interesting part about this is, remember, I had that one aborted celestial mission ever since I'd gotten out of school. And you had one very nervous young navigator when we left the shoreline, Farallon Islands, I think they are, something, and headed for Hawaii. Well, I got my first fix, and we were right on course, and I thought, well, this is not so bad, this is okay. So the rest of the night, I think I was the most relaxed person on the crew, because you know, about every half hour, it takes roughly a half hour to locate the stars and get out the air almanac and shoot it and plot it and so forth. And we were bang on course, you know, and I'd make the little bit of correction, but about every 15 or 20 minutes, one of the gunners would call and say, "J.O. Gunner to Navigator, how are we doing, sir?" "Doing great." And then the pilot would call 20 minutes later, and he says, "Bob, things going well?" I said, "No problem." All night long. And finally they relaxed a little bit, and everything was great, and we just right straight on course all the time. And then I took a shot and plotted it, and we're 30 miles off course. And I thought, how the hell could that be? You know, I made a mistake someplace, or was it the shot, or did? So I got out my sextant and got up in the Astrodome, but it was getting to be dawn, and there was enough light in the sky that I could not see a star, and the sun had not yet come up, so I couldn't shoot the sun either. And I thought, well, hell, there's no way I could be 30 miles off when everything had been going along so well all night long. And no one was asking me how we were doing by that time. And I thought, okay, I mean, if we miss the island, we'll drown in the Pacific, but there was nothing I could do. And there was some sort of a rule that when aircraft were within, I don't know, 45 minutes or an hour or a half hour or something of the island, they would turn on the radio, and we hit that point just about the time that the sun was getting high enough to for me to get a sun line. And when the pilot turned it on, pow, right in the middle. So it was just, I just screwed up. I don't know till yet what I did, and I didn't go back and check, and I thought, well, we're here, and that's the main thing. So we landed and had a delicious Christmas dinner of hot dogs and fresh pineapple juice.
Bob, you talked about shooting the stars a couple of times and using a sextant. Can you take just a minute and explain what that is? How you did that?
Oh, sure. Well, you have an instrument called a sextant. So what you do is you pick out normally a star ahead of you to the right, ahead of you to the left, and either dead ahead or directly behind you. Now the sextant is an instrument that will measure the elevation of that star from your position. There is a bubble on the top of the sextant that when you put your eye in to shoot the star, you are keeping the star in the crosshairs, but at the same time you can see this bubble, and you must keep the bubble centered. It's kind of like a level that you have in your garage, and you keep the bubble centered, and you shoot this. You get a reading, an angle reading on that star, and you mark a time. And you get an angle reading on the second star. That's what you call shooting the star. You're measuring that, and then you get all three, and you've written down the time. And then you look at what's called an air almanac, and it tells you in the air almanac the position of that star at the time that you shot it. So then you go ahead and you calculate all of this. You know where the star was at that time, you know what your angle was at that time, and where these three lines cross. That is your fix, and that's the one that you're very proud of if you get within 2 miles. Just it forms a little triangle, and you're probably right in the middle of that triangle.
So over the course of a flight, you're plotting successive points.
Oh yes.
To draw your line toward the ultimate destination.
Well, you have your line already drawn toward the ultimate destination, and then when you get your fix, you put your mark on the map, and you compare that to the line that you have drawn to your destination, and you make your corrections accordingly.
So at that point, if there was a difference, you'd call to the pilots and say, change the heading.
Yeah, 2 degrees left or right or whatever it happens to be, so that you can, you try to figure out, okay, if that happened, the wind is this, and if I want to get back, not necessarily to the center line, but to the course to where we're going, that he corrects this much, and maybe, and probably the next fix will bring you closer to that center line and so forth. That's why I said earlier, I believe, about every half hour, because it will take you about a half hour to do the selection and the shooting and the plotting and the corrections.
So you stayed pretty busy during a flight.
Oh, you don't rest too much, no. You know, especially at night. During the day, there's very little that you can do except like I say, shoot the sun lines and so forth. And sun lines are a whole lot easier when you're flying north and south and the sun is going east and west. But they're not very good at best anyway, but that's the only thing you have to go by. Does that answer your question on celestial?
Yes.
Okay.
So you're in Hawaii. You stay in Hawaii very long, or
No,
are you on to somewhere
I
else?
think just, I don't remember whether we left the next day or the day after. And we headed south, and we landed at Canton, Tarawa, Guadalcanal. And when we landed at Guadalcanal, we thought the airplane was coming apart, because all of our flying had been either on paved runways or coral runways that were all smooth. And at Guadalcanal, we landed on what's called a pierced steel plank runway, which is just what it says. It's sheets of steel that are maybe, well, it's about the size of a sheet of plywood, and it has about 4-inch holes all the way through, and they latch on the side, and you lock them all together so you have a runway surface. But as you pass over and the weight of the airplane rattles this, it's an experience the first time you do that. But we did that, and then we ended up at a place called Nadzab, which is the eastern tip of New Guinea. And we were there for, I guess, a couple weeks. I guess they were deciding kind of what we were going to be doing in the theater. And we flew a couple practice missions against a place called Wewak, which is about halfway up the north coast of New Guinea. And it was one of the, as nearly as we could tell, it's one of the supply towns for the Japanese forces, and that it had been bypassed when MacArthur and all of the troops had been moving forward, or not MacArthur at that time, but the troops had been island hopping, and they had only taken the strategic ones and kind of bypassed these supply stations, and that's what we were doing, is disrupting the supply. As far as I know, very seldom did they tell us why we were doing what we were doing. But then we flew to Biak, which is on the western end of New Guinea, and then, bless their hearts, they took away our brand new airplane that we had worked so hard to make perfect in every way. And they put us on a C-46, and they sent it up to a little island called Morotai, which is about halfway between the western tip of New Guinea and the southern tip of the Philippines, and that was going to be our base of operations.
About how far is Morotai south of Mindanao? Mindanao being the southernmost island, you know, roughly? It's less than 1,000 miles, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's less than 1,000 miles.
Okay.
Quite a bit less, because when we flew to targets in Mindanao, our normal missions were about 10 hours, which would have been 5 hours out, 5 hours back, and we were cruising, I don't know, 160 or 170 miles an hour. And I don't remember these figures exactly.
Okay.
And incidentally, I'd like to interject something at this point. In retrospect, I had probably one of the easiest combat tours during the entire war. I'll tell you a bit later about some of the missions that we flew, but we always had hot chow. We slept on sheets. We did not wallow in the mud like the infantrymen did, or freeze in the snow like the guys at the Battle of the Bulge. We didn't spend weeks and months at sea and never see anything but water. We certainly didn't do anything like the Marines storming the islands and fighting the Japanese hand to hand. We did what we were told, and we were happy to serve. And as we talk, I'll tell you kind of what we did. But overall, I had one of the easiest, we had one of the easiest combat tours of the entire war. And sometimes I almost feel guilty being clumped with World War II veterans who did undergo those horrific conditions and exposure to danger and so forth. It's just the luck of the draw, but I'm very grateful to the Lord for putting me in that position.
Let's, before we get into your combat tour and some of the specific missions, let's talk about just a couple of other things real quick. You mentioned a moment ago, we were talking about the sextant here a few moments ago, that there was a bubble on it that you needed to keep level, similar to like a level that you would, as you say, have in your garage. Did the pilots understand the importance of that?
Not initially. They didn't. I mean, okay, I have to interject one other thing here. My navigation was, my navigation training was all in the northern hemisphere. And now we're flying in the southern hemisphere. And there's all different stars down there. You no longer have the North Star, Polaris, you have the Southern Cross, and you have different constellations. So I had to learn all of those constellations and do the shooting. And the pilots really were not aware of what I was doing. I mean, we're flying celestial and Bob is telling us where to go. And one day I got a little bit upset with him, and I took the pilot and co-pilot and I sat him down and I said, okay, this is the way that I plot a fix. And I told him just what I've told you. You pick out the star and you shoot it and so forth. And I said, and you shoot it with this sextant. And I gave him the sextant, and they held it, and I said, okay, you move this handle to get the star centered. Do you have that? Yes. And I said, you see the bubble on there? I said, keep that bubble centered. And, you know, they're like this, and I said, be my guest, lean against the post, and keep it settled like that. And they both did. And they each got a shot. And then I said, okay, I've told you how to plot it, now let's plot it. And they plotted it, and it was about, what, 35 or 40 miles off the island. I said, now, you are standing on the ground, and you're leaning against the post, and you